Isaiah 58, chapters 1 through 12. Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. Why do we fast, but do you not see? Why humble ourselves, but do you not notice? Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day and oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall rise up from the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach and restorer of streets to live.
It's good to see you. Thank you for the snow for 2 weeks in a row for me to travel down from Lakewood. I made it. I'm glad to be here with you again this week. The New Testament lessons from the Gospel of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, the 5th chapter, beginning with the 13th verse. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Well, today I want to talk about I see the Christ in you. Isaiah cries out for justice for the poor, as all the Old Testament prophets do, confronting everybody, people in power and everybody, with God's compassion, concern for the poor, the hungry, the homeless, the oppressed. And then Isaiah says, you do not see, you do not notice. And I found myself studying on that, focused on that. And I thought, well, what do we not see? What do we not notice? That's one of the questions that I thought about today. And then in the gospel, we read about the fact that we are the light of the world. And we're told to let our lights shine. Well, what is that light exactly? And then I remember Jesus saying in another one of the gospels, I am the light of the world. And I have to wonder, is that light the light of Christ inside us? And so these things led me to this theme and to this question, really. What makes Jesus different? Leaving aside whether Jesus is God and the divinity of God, let's just say as a human being, what makes Jesus different? And my conclusion through my journey at this point in time has led me to proclaim that Jesus saw God, saw himself, and saw other people differently than most of us. Jesus recognized God's DNA in every person. Now, I think Jesus was a product of history, and if I were to go up to Jesus in Jesus' day and say, tell me about DNA, Jesus would go, what? DNA is obviously a more recent scientific discovery and understanding about how we're made up as human beings and so forth, and how DNA is passed on from mom and dad to children, etc. But Jesus, I still recognize that God's DNA is in all people, that everyone is a child of God, everyone is made in God's image, Hebrew or Gentile, powerful or powerless, men or women, rich or poor, well or ill. And Jesus is that fulfillment of the Old Testament promise that one is coming who will open God to the whole world, not just to the Hebrew people, but to everyone. Well, where did this perception of Jesus, that everyone is carrying God's DNA, come from? Well, one could argue at birth. But what strikes me is really his baptism. When he's baptized and he hears, or in some translations, everybody hears, "You are my beloved Son." I think that was truly a transforming moment. And I think in that moment, Jesus recognized that he is not only the Son of God, but that everyone is a son or daughter of God. Now, every time I talk about this in some context or another, there's always those people who say, "You don't mean everyone." Yeah, I do. Well, don't you mean just the followers of Jesus? No, I don't. And this is how I explain that. Now, I don't know if, I raised 5 children. And inevitably they get to those teenage years where they don't like dad or mom. Matter of fact, they would even argue, "You're not really my dad. Because if you were, you'd love me and give me what I want," or something like that. Or, in the younger teen years, we might go to a movie, and then we get to the theater, and my son goes, "Can you sit over on that side?" Oh, aren't I a member of the family? Well, not here, not today. Well, no matter how much my children protest that I am not their father, does that change the truth? No. I can prove, they carry my DNA. I can prove by DNA that you are my son or daughter. I don't care how much you deny it or reject me, that doesn't change the truth. Well, I think there's something to be said here. There are a lot of people in the world who don't recognize God or Jesus as any one thing or anyone special, but that doesn't change the truth that each one of us carries God's DNA. Each one of us is a child of God. Each one of us is made in the image of God. And, my son may, however bad my son may be, or how much ever my son rejects me or denies me, that doesn't change the fact that I love him. And the same is true for God. I find an interesting text in the Gospel of John where Jesus is talking about resurrection and what will happen afterwards. And he says in John 14:20, "I'm alive and you're about to become alive." As if we're not alive yet. At that moment, you will know absolutely that I am in the Father and you are in me and I am in you. That God dwells within us, that Christ dwells within us. Clearly, Jesus points to this in Matthew 25 when he says, "Even as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me," or vice versa. If you've not done it unto the least of these, you've not done it unto me. What does that mean? And then, in Luke, we hear Jesus saying, "The kingdom of God is within you." And Paul even proclaims, "Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you?" And then at another point in Paul's most brilliant moment, he says, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing. Not denial or rejection or betrayal or whatever. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. And I always add, and what part of nothing don't you get? Seeing and living this truth, that everyone carries God's DNA, that everyone is a son or daughter of God. I believe this is what makes Jesus the living face of God in the eyes of those who traveled with him long ago and in the eyes of those who follow him today. And it's the gospel message that we need to be sharing and proclaiming. It's what allows Jesus to be so inclusive, so loving, so forgiving, reaching out to the unclean and to the marginal and to the poor and to the Gentiles in a way that was so unacceptable to so many others in his culture. And then there was his resurrection, which is just phenomenal, in that if I had been Jesus and I had been tortured and executed as a common criminal when I had done nothing wrong, and then I was raised to life with all the power of God at my fingertips, I would want to get even. It's payback time. But not Jesus. Why not? Because Jesus recognized that even in those who tortured and executed him, there's God's DNA. That they are children of God. That they are sons and daughters of God. And so he is risen to life and shares nothing but words of peace and love and forgiveness. Some of you may be familiar with Hindu tradition and culture, I don't know. How many of you have heard of the phrase namaste, which is a greeting that Hindus often share with one another? How many of you have heard of it? Yeah. And namaste, they come up, they fold their hands, they bow, namaste, which literally means I bow to you. And when you unpack that, what Hindus mean is the sacred in me recognizes the sacred in you. Namaste. The God in me recognizes the God in you. Namaste. Now, this is also carried out in fictional literature. How many of you have seen the movie Avatar? A few. It's worth seeing. It's a long movie and it's science fiction. I don't know if you're into science fiction, but it's a movie about people on a distant planet. They're called the Navi people, and of course, Earth people have gone to the planet to take from this planet raw materials that Earth needs against their will, and that's a long story. But anyway, the scientific researchers who have really established a relationship with the Navi people are trying to interpret their culture to the Earth people. And they said, when Navi people greet you, they will say, I see you. And it doesn't mean I physically see you. You got to understand what they're saying is, I see the sacred in you. I see Iwa, which is the name of their God, in you. I see that we are connected by that spiritual nature. I see you. Namaste. I see the Christ in you. I remember performing a dramatic reading when I was in college, and I forget the name of the reading, but I'll never forget the first line. It stuck with me. There is a Christ in you trying to break out. Now, how many of you looked into a mirror this morning as part of your preparations for getting ready for the day? Yeah? What did you see there? What did you see when you looked in the mirror?
My hair's standing up.
Your hair standing up. I gotta do something with this hair. What else did you see? Oh, the gray hairs. Oh, the wrinkles. Oh, I'm getting fat. All kinds of things you see. But I want you to pull out your mirror now and play along with me here. You all have imagination. Be little kids with me for the moment. Pull out a mirror and put it in front of you. And look at the reflection in the mirror. What I want you to see is to look in that mirror and say, I see the Christ in me. I see the Christ in you. And I wonder if we did that, what difference it might make in our lives. To say, I see the Christ in me. I am God's anointed one, which is the literal translation for Christ. I am God's son. I see God's son or God's daughter in the mirror. I carry God's DNA. And this truth has no relationship to your beliefs or behavior. The truth is a reflection not so much on who you are, but the reality and character of God in Christ Jesus. If you could wake up, look in the mirror, and say those things to yourself, how might you see yourself differently? How might you judge yourself differently? How might it change the way you walk into the day before you? Now, I know people who wake up and go, I wonder what's going to go wrong today. I wake up and go, not a bad start. I know people who don't wake up. And I kind of say, well, nothing's going to happen to me today that God and I can't handle. But then I look in the mirror and I try to remind myself, I am God's son. I am beloved. I see the Christ in me. And again, that has nothing to do with what I have done the day before, what I think, what I believe. It says everything about the reality of God. And what if we were to greet everyone with that same affirmation? I see the Christ in you. Or from an interfaith perspective, I see God or the sacred in you. How might that influence our responses, our judgments, our attitudes, our behaviors? I mean, if I greeted everybody at school, or everybody in my workplace, or everybody in my home, or everybody in my neighborhood, or everybody in my community, everybody in the grocery store, everybody in the bank, with I see the Christ in you, I see the sacred in you, could I then turn around and bully that person, gossip about that person, ignore that person, hurt that person, torture that person, kill that person? Not feed that person, not want to provide a home for that person? How many of you have, in one church or another, passed the peace of Christ as a part of the morning liturgy? Yeah. That it may not be done here, but in many churches, you come up to somebody and in a moment of fellowship, within the peace of Christ be with you. It's as if you need Christ's peace, and let me give it to you. I don't know if Tim needs Christ's peace or not. I want to change that liturgy. I want to change that liturgy so that we walk up and greet one another in church by saying, I see the Christ in you. Take a moment and look into the eye of someone around you, beside you, in front of you. Stand up for a minute. It'll keep you awake. And greet a couple of people around you by saying, I see the Christ in you. Okay, now, thank you. Be seated, please. Now, tell me what either you felt or what you thought when that was said to you. Pardon? A little uncomfortable. Because it's different. Yeah, because it's different. What else did you think or feel?
It was fine in church.
It was what?
Fine in church.
It was fine in church, yeah. Okay. Has a place in church. I don't know about out in the world.
I tried to do it at the grocery store.
Yeah. It would be really countercultural. You can think it, even if you don't say it, though. That's what I want to urge you to think about. But what else did you think or feel?
Good.
It felt affirming? Yeah. Yes?
It felt nice.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
It felt nice to meet people.
I'm sorry. I just didn't hear.
It felt nice.
It felt nice. Yeah, it feels nice. Now let's be honest though for a minute. Did anybody go, oh yeah, right? Huh? Huh? Come on. Oh yeah, right. There is a Christ in you, trying to break out. And when Jesus says, let your light shine, that light is the light of Christ. But you first have to recognize it and accept it and nurture it and affirm it for yourself before you can do it for others. There's a famous rabbi story that I like to share. It's too long to share the whole story, but basically the student comes and says, what's the secret of a healthy spiritual life? And the rabbi says, awareness. The student goes, what? Did you hear me? Awareness. I don't get what that means. The rabbi says, awareness. When I say awareness, I mean awareness. Awareness. Awareness, what don't you get? How much simpler can I make it? Jesus was fully aware of God. Truth of God. Fully aware of who he was. And fully aware of who everyone else was as a child of God. And if we can nurture that awareness, what a transforming thing that could be, not only to ourselves, but to our church, to our community, and ultimately to the world. It begins when you look in the mirror, and then reaches out to all others. And when I say all, I mean all. Friend or stranger, young, old, male, female, rich, poor, white, black, gay, straight, Democrat, Republican, Independent, African or Iranian, Christian or Muslim, conservative or progressive, legal immigrant or illegal immigrant, the President of the United States, or the drug-addicted movie star, or the alcoholic, homeless, mentally ill person. We are more alike than unlike in the eyes of God. We all share God's DNA. I see the Christ in you. I hope you'll take a moment today over lunch to talk about this, think about this, share your thoughts about this. How can you nurture this in yourself? And then how can you mentally nurture this awareness in regards to other people? And isn't this what we're called to do when we're called to share the gospel, the good news? This is the good news. That you are loved, that you are a child of God, that you are sacred. God doesn't make junk. God doesn't dwell in the unholy, but yet God dwells in all of us. Irregardless of our beliefs or behavior, just as I love my child, period. That's the good news. How might this transform me? How might this transform others? My family, my church, my workplace, my school, my community, our culture, our world. Jesus says, I'm alive and you're about to come alive. And you will know absolutely that I am in my Father and you are in me and I am in you. I am the light of the world. You are the light of the world. Let your light shine. Isaiah asks or states in God's, what do we not see? What do we not notice? We don't see and notice the Christ within ourselves and others. So let your light shine. I see the Christ in you.